As you can see, the title is quite controversial. The Muslims are going to be upset. Let me tell you what I'm not saying. I am not saying that Muslims knowingly worship the false god Baal. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, you'll note that the main competitor for the worship and allegiance of the Israelites was the false god Baal. All throughout the Old Testament, you'll find God chastening, disciplining, rebuking, punishing, even exiling his people for their habitual habit of turning to the false god Baal. The name Baal also pops out in the New Testament under the name Beelzebub. If you read Mark 3, for instance, 22 all the way 30, the Jews accused Jesus of casting out demons by Beelzebub, the prince of demons. The word Baal means Lord, husband, or master. This was the main chief competitor that Satan used to get the Israelites to forsake God, their love for God, a devotion to God, and worship this false god. In fact, Baal is simply Satan's disguise. Because if you go with what the Jews said, Mark 3, 22 to 30, Beelzebub is the prince of demons. But the prince of demons would be Satan. So here, if the Jews are right and Jesus didn't correct them, that means Beelzebub, Baal, is simply another name of Satan. Because there's only one ruler of demons, Satan. He rules the kingdom of darkness. All evil spirits are subject to him. So if Beelzebub is the ruler of demons, then that means that's another name for Satan, because Satan has various names. Satan, the devil, Belial, Beliar, the serpent, the dragon. These are his names. So that means Baal is simply Satan appearing as a god in order to mislead people from worshiping the true God. Now, if that's true, Allah is simply another name for Baal, and Islam is simply another form of Baal worship, then that actually further confirms Islam is the religion of the devil. It's Satan's religion that Satan inspired through Muhammad to be the competitor against Judeo-Christianity. And that would make sense, right? Because all throughout Old Testament history, the chief competitor to Yahweh, Yahovah, was Baal. Right now, as we speak, the chief competitor, the chief religion competing for the devotion of the hearts and minds of not just the world, but of Jews and Christians, is Islam. So it's like history repeating itself. As Solomon said in the book of Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun, the same lie, the same deceit, the same trickery being promoted throughout the ages, but under different disguises, repackaged. It's the same deceit, but repackaged. That doesn't mean Muslims know they're worshiping Baal. That's the deception. That's the deceit. Just like when the Israelites worshiped Baal, they didn't think they were worshiping Satan. They still were worshiping demons nonetheless. Deuteronomy 32, verses 16 to 17. Talking about the Israelites, they provoked him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations, provoked him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers fear not. Did you catch it? The Israelites were sacrificing to devils, to demons, though that's not what they thought they were doing. Similarly, Muslims don't think they're worshiping Baal. They think they're worshiping the true God of Abraham, and that's the deceit of Satan. Satan doesn't care whether you know you're worshiping him or not. In fact, he doesn't care whether you acknowledge he exists or not. He doesn't even care if you're an atheist. He just doesn't want you to know the true God and the true gospel, because that's the only way you can escape him and overcome him. Fact number one, Hubal was the chief deity, the chief god of Mecca and of the shrine, the Kaaba. That's the first fact. Fact number two, Hubal was actually Baal. Hubal, and the Muslim sources will testify, was actually the Arabic name for Baal. Some people believe Hubal either comes from Hubal, he is Baal, two Arabic words, or it is an Arabicized corruption of the Hebrew words Ha-Baal, the Baal. The third fact, the sources don't come out and say it, but that's the logical, necessary inference. Hubal was Allah, Allah was Hubal. If you actually read, quote unquote, between the lines, you're going to see Hubal was Allah, Allah was Hubal. So are you now ready to dig in? I want to give you a little background on the pagan religion in Mecca. Medina, that's Arabia. Mecca, according to the Muslim sources, is the place where Muhammad was born. The Quraysh tribe, which was an Arab tribe that lived in Mecca. And according to the Muslim sources, I'm quoting the late Abdullah Yusuf Ali in his translation of the Quran. He admits that the Arabs before Muhammad and during the time Muhammad were into astral worship, where they worshiped the sun and moon and 5 planets because they thought there were only 5 planets. Now let's do the math. Sun, moon, 5 planets, that's 7, right? Now, in many cultures, the sun was the male deity and the moon was the female consort, the female deity. Not in Arabia. In Arabia, the moon was the male deity and the sun was the female deity. And the sun was the consort, the wife of the moon. Let me read what he says. This is a Muslim. Now, he's passed away, but he admits this. To revert to the worship of the heavenly bodies, okay? A few individual stars did attract the worshippers' attention. So the Arabs worship Sirius, the dog star, the brightest fixed star in the heavens with a blush tinge in its light. It is probably Sirius that is referred to as the fixed star in the parable of Abraham. With regard to the fixed stars and their myriads, the astronomers turned their fancy to devising groups or constellations. Now, here's where it's going to get relevant, okay? But the moving stars are planets, each with a motion and therefore will or influence of its own, right? As they knew and understood them, they were 7 in number. That's what they thought, 7. And now he tells you what the 7 are. Viz, 1 and 2, the moon and the sun. So count. The 2 objects which most closely and indubitably influence the tides, the temperatures, and the life in our planet. 3 and 4, the 2 inner planets, Mercury and Venus. So that's 4 so far, which are morning and evening stars and never travel far from the sun. 5, 6, and 7, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the outer planets whose elongation from the sun on the ecliptic can be as wide as possible. The number 7 itself is a mystical number, as explained in note 5526. Okay, now, notice what he's going to say. It will be noticed that the sun and the moon and the 5 planets got identified, associated with, each with a living deity, god or goddess, with characteristics and qualities of its own. Now, before I read the rest of the part, did you catch what he just said? This is a Muslim whose Quran translation was widely circulated and distributed in the 20th century. The Arabs in Mecca, in Arabia, but in Mecca, worship the sun and moon and 5 planets as 7 gods and goddesses. You're going to see the relevance in a minute. And I hope I don't put you to sleep here. The Arabic word for the moon, qamar, is of the masculine gender. And on the other hand, the Arabic word for the sun, shams, is of the feminine gender. The pagan Arabs evidently looked upon the sun as a goddess and the moon as a god. So the Arabs in Mecca, they viewed the moon as the male god and the sun as the female god, or the goddess. That's going to be important. Okay, folks, let me bring out the implication. The sources teach that the Kaaba in Mecca in Saudi Arabia was a shrine that housed 360 idols. This is in the Muslim sources. It's not non-Muslim sources. The Muslim sources also admit the pagans before Muhammad would perform what they call the rites of pilgrimage, Hajj and Umrah, meaning they would come to the Kaaba, and those who lived there didn't need to travel, and the pagans would run around it 7 times. 7 times. Something Muslims do to this day. Muslims adopted these practices from the pagans. And then there are 2 hills in Mecca called Safa and Marwa. And they'd run between these hills 7 times. 7 times. And the Muslim sources say that at one time there were 2 idols on both hills. There was an idol here and an idol there, and they'd run 7 times. Now, folks, can I ask you a question? Why did the pagans run 7 times between the 2 hills, Safa and Marwa, and run around the Kaaba 7 times? Practices which Islam adopted, Muhammad observed, and Muslims continue to this day. But why did the pagans do it? They did it in worship of the gods and goddesses, the 7 planetary deities. Thank you. So, folks, why in the world did Muhammad continue that practice? And why are Muslims running around the Kaaba 7 times and between the 2 hills 7 times, all of which even the Muslim sources admit were practices that the pagans observed because they believed in the sun and moon and 5 planets as god and goddesses that they had to worship and venerate? Why are the Muslims still doing it? Do you want to hear what their silly excuse is? Because Ishmael settled in Mecca, and Abraham came and visited Ishmael, and Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba as the first house of worship. And so Ishmael taught them these practices, but as time went on, his descendants corrupted these practices and then attached them to gods and goddesses. So originally it was practices done for Yehovah, the worship of Jehovah. But then the descendants of Ishmael corrupted themselves, became idolaters, and then corrupted the practices and attached them to their gods and goddesses. Are you buying that version of history? And is it a coincidence that Ishmael told them, hey, run between the 2 hills 7 times, run around the Kaaba 7 times, and somehow, magically, 7 becomes the number of the gods and goddesses that the pagans worship because they thought there were 5 planets in the sun and the moon. Gee, what a coincidence. Let alone all the historical archaeological evidence refutes the claim that Ishmael went to Mecca. Because if you believe in your Bible, Genesis 21:21, it says Ishmael settled in the wilderness of Paran, and Paran is around Egypt and Canaan. It's not in Mecca. And Genesis 21:21 says that Ishmael married an Egyptian because his mother Hagar was from Egypt, and she got him a wife from Egypt. So he never settled in Mecca, and he didn't marry an Arab woman and sired the Arabs in Mecca. This much the Muslims admit. Now, folks, let me add another thing as we get into the evidence. You remember what the source just stated? I just read Abdullah Yusuf Ali. He said to the Arabs, the moon, the Arabic word qamar, is masculine, denoting the fact that the Arabs viewed the moon as the male deity. meaning it was the planet, the astral object associated with the chief deity. And remember, the Arabs are what they call patriarchal society, meaning the male is the chief. So their god has to be male. He's the chief. The moon is the planet representing the chief male deity of their pantheon. You with me there? The sun is the female. The sun represents the female, the goddess, that's the wife of the male deity. Follow with me. The chief deity is supposed to be Allah. He's the chief deity. He's the male deity. Well, if the moon was viewed as masculine, qamar, and it's the male deity or the planet or the object associated with the male deity, that means you just established that for the pagans, Allah was the moon god. Oh my goodness. If we take what the sources say, remember, I said sometimes the sources will just come out and say something black and white. Other times they don't say it, but it's the necessary logical conclusion and inference from what they are saying. Allah was the name of Hubal. Hubal is the moon god, and Hubal is actually the idol Baal. And I'm now going to show it to you. Let's begin. Point number one, Hubal, Mecca's chief deity. The chief god of Mecca, the god of the Kaaba, the god of that shrine, the Lord of that shrine in Mecca. The chief god of the pagans in Mecca was Hubal. Okay, this comes from Gods, Goddesses, and Mythology, volume 11, page 137. Hubal, chief god of the Kaaba, a martial and auricular deity, a moon god. What was Hubal? A moon god. Who was the chief god of Mecca, of the Kaaba, of the shrine? Hubal. This comes from Cyril Glasse, and this comes from the New Encyclopedia of Islam, page 209. Hubal, an idol, the god of the moon. Centuries before Islam, Amr ibn Luhay, a chief of the tribe of Jurhum who dwelt in Mecca, before the coming of the Quraysh tribe, brought the idol to the city from Syria. Wow. It was set up in the Kaaba and became the principal idol of the pagan Meccans. Folks, do you understand the implication of what we just read? Hubal was an idol from Syria. An Arab named Amr ibn Luhay brought the idol from Syria to Mecca, and Hubal became the chief god of Mecca. The chief god in Syria among the pagans was Baal. Baal was the god that was worshipped by the Syrians before the time of Muhammad. If this Arab, Amr, brought the idol from Syria, what was he bringing to the Kaaba? The idol of Baal, before Muhammad. So he brought the idol Baal from Syria, and that's why it's called Hubal. And notice, Hubal became the chief god of the Kaaba of Mecca. So you understand what the sources just admit? Hubal is the god of the moon. He's the moon god. Hubal was the god of the Kaaba, the god of Mecca, the chief god. Hubal was the idol from Syria. These three facts are admitted explicitly by the sources. So now let's break it down. If Hubal is from Syria and the chief god worshipped in Syria is Baal, we just established Hubal is Baal. That means Baal was the chief god of Mecca, the chief god of the Kaaba, and Baal was then seen to be the moon god, the god of the moon. But there's more. Hubal was pulled down and used as a doorstep when the Prophet conquered Mecca and purified the Kaaba. Okay, let's look at some other sources. Are you ready? Again, this is Encyclopedia of Islam, and it says Hubal, a pre-Islamic deity represented by an idol in Kaaba that was destroyed by Muhammad when he conquered Mecca in 630. Patron of the Quraysh. Remember, Muhammad's tribe is the Quraysh tribe. Muhammad's tribe is the Quraysh tribe. What does patron of the Quraysh mean? It means the chief god of this tribe. That was their patron god. That was their chief god. So who was the chief god of the Quraysh? Hubal. What tribe was Muhammad born? Quraysh. So who was the chief god of Muhammad's family, of Muhammad's tribe, of Muhammad? Hubal. Who is Hubal? Baal. Muhammad was born in Baal worship. Baal. And this is Encyclopedia of Islam saying it. Did you understand what you just read? Encyclopedia of Islam. The chief god of the Quraysh was Hubal. Hubal was the god of the moon, an idol brought from Syria. Muhammad's tribe is Quraysh. He was born into the Quraysh tribe. That means Muhammad was born in a family that worshiped Baal. And by the way, these articles, these sources have been there for over 10 years, over 15 years on our Answering Islam website. AnsweringIslam.net. I wrote this material years ago. I just compiled it together for today's session. But all this information was there for you guys if you just went to the site and read them for the glory of Jesus. Bill Shepard, answer your question. It's like the word Elohim. Bill Shepard, I'm going to let you answer the question. Elohim is not the proper name of God because Elohim is a generic noun meaning God. Anyone can use the word Elohim for the God they worship, right? Bill Shepard, right? That's why in Judges 16:23, Dagon, the god of the Philistines, is called their Elohim. Judges 16:23-24, it says Dagon, their Elohim. So Elohim is used for the false god Dagon. So Elohim is not the proper name of God. It's a generic noun, meaning God, that you can use for the particular God you worship, right? Allah is the name used to refer to the supreme God. So Allah is not a proper name per se. It becomes a proper name in Islam. But Allah is simply the name that someone would use to refer to their God. So now, do the math. Add 1 + 1 and come up with 2. If Allah is not the proper name, but it's the name that you use to refer to the supreme God, and Hubal is the supreme God, then simply put, Hubal was Allah. The Allah of the pagans, his proper name was Hubal. So when you ask the pagans, who is the Allah you worship? Hubal. Hubal Allah. Like if you ask the Philistines, who's the Elohim you worship? Dagon Elohim. Are you catching it now? Now Islam takes Allah and makes it a proper name. Who's not getting this? Is it making sense? Is it making sense? Okay. Text me, folks, because I can't read the comment section. Text me. When I say folks, first, last, you know what I mean, and Protestant, if I start buffering, because I got to read some more. Let me read some more. It's all in the article. Okay, let me read some more sources. The Cambridge Companion to the Quran, page 24. Pay attention to this. The Cambridge Companion to the Quran, page 24. The Sirah literature presents Mecca's cult, the cult of Mecca, the religion of Mecca, as a pagan one to the god Hubal, and depicts the Arabian religious environment in which Muhammad grew up as overwhelmingly pagan. Wait. So the Meccans were devoted to the god Hubal? So the chief god of the Meccans and the Kaaba is Hubal? There you go. How many more sources do I need to quote? Well, let me quote a couple more. Mahmoud M. Ayub, a Muslim. This is a Muslim, page 15. Mahmoud M. Ayub, Islam, Faith and History. Among the many deities that Arabs worshipped in and around the Kaaba were the god Hubal and the 3 goddesses Alad, Al-Uzza, Manat. Hubal was originally a moon god and perhaps also a rain god, as Hubal means vapor. And guess what? Baal was also the god of fertility, the god of rain. Did you know that? Baal was the god of fertility, the god of rain, the god of thunder. And this is a Muslim who just admit this. Hubal was originally a moon god and perhaps also a rain god. Wow. Guys, don't get distracted by side discussions. Here's another one. Mark Deling, a convert to Islam, a Muslim who died, and he wrote a biography on Muhammad's life, called Muhammad is Life based on the earliest sources, page 5. Watch here. Khuza'a thus shared the guilt of Jurhum. They're also to blame in other respects. Now, here's what's beautiful. A chieftain of theirs, on his way back from a journey to Syria, coming back from Syria, asked the Moabites, oh my goodness, the Moabites, to give him one of their idols. They gave him Hubal, which he brought back to the sanctuary, setting it up within the Kaaba, and it became the chief idol of Mecca. Who gave him the idol? The Moabites. Who are the Moabites? The descendants of Lot. The Moabites in Syria, whom the Old Testament says worship Baal. He had asked the Moabites to give him one of their idols. They gave him Hubal, which he brought to the sanctuary, setting it up within the Kaaba itself, and it became the chief idol of Mecca. And this is a Muslim admitting this, admitting these facts. Are you guys getting blown away here? Hubal is the idol of the Moabites in Syria. The idol of the Moabites, Hubal, was brought to the Kaaba, and he became the chief god of the Kaaba, the chief god of Mecca. Folks, you're reading it for yourselves. What more evidence do you need that the pagan Arabs were Baal worshippers? They worship Baal. They worship Baal. Baal was their chief god, the god of the Kaaba. But the Muslims tell me the Kaaba was built for Allah. Wait, if the Kaaba is Baal's shrine and the Kaaba is Allah's shrine, and you can't have more than one god of the shrine, that means Baal is Allah, Allah is Baal. You guys blown away? The triune God is awesome, Bill Shepherd. That's why bathe me in prayer. Ask Jesus to keep filling me with wisdom, knowledge, boldness, passion, destroy my fears and doubts, unbelief, make me holy and in love with him, in love with Jesus, and to continue this work until the Lord calls me home. And you know what's the thing, guys? This information has been on the website, Answering Islam, for over 15 years. Now, don't ask me why I didn't talk about this previously, because I felt the need just to focus on Christian doctrines. But for some reason, it came into my mind, you know, it's time for me to show people that Allah is Baal. Islam is Baal worship, right? I got more. Now here, this is a lengthy one. I'm not going to read all of it. This comes from Hisham ibn al-Kalbi, a Muslim who wrote the book called Kitab al-Asnam, the Book of Idols. He wrote a history of the idols worshipped by the pagans in Arabia and Mecca specifically. This is a Muslim, an ancient Muslim source. You can read on Answering Islam. Let me give you the link. Okay, here it is. It's right here. You can read it. Click on it. This is an ancient Muslim source, a Muslim wrote a book on the gods and goddesses worshipped by the Arabs, especially in Mecca. Okay? So now this is a Muslim source. Let's see what he says about Hubal. You ready? Let's see what he says about Hubal. Okay, right here. The Quraysh were wont to venerate her above all other idols. For this reason, Zayd ibn al-Amr ibn Nufail, who during the Jahiliyyah, means pre-Islamic period, before Islam, had turned to the worship of God and renounced that of Al-Uzza and of other idols. And he said, now notice what this former pagan, who was roughly contemporary with Muhammad, Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, what he says, he's now reciting poetry. I've renounced both Alat, is his poetry. I've renounced Alat and Al-Uzza. I don't worship them anymore. For thus would the brave and the robust do. No more do I worship Al-Uzza and her two daughters, or visit the two idols of the Banu Ghanam, nor do I journey to Hubal and adore it, although it was our Lord when I was young. Even though when I was young, Hubal was our Lord, I renounced Hubal. The Quraysh also had several idols in around the Kaaba. The greatest of these was Hubal. This is a Muslim source. Hisham ibn al-Kalbi, the Book of Idols, Kitab al-Aslam. You with me there? You got it? Sergeant David, the majority of Muslims don't know this, and they'll be shocked to hear this, and they'll say you're lying. They don't know this. They'll be shocked, and they'll say you're lying. Now, other sources that are friendly to Islam, they're not critics of Islam. Maxime Rodinson wrote a book called Mohammed, page 16. The great god of Mecca was Hubal. The great god of Mecca was Hubal. Same source, page 40. The Kaaba, which may have initially been a shrine of Hubal alone. Wow. Here, folks, you don't understand what this is going to do to Islam. The Kaaba, which may have initially been a shrine of Hubal alone, housed several idols, meaning when it was built, the shrine was built, there was only Hubal. Later on, they started adding idols. But initially, when it was built, there was only the god Hubal, his idol there. Later on, they started adding idols, okay? Again, Malis Ruthven, Islam in the World, page 15. The presiding deity was Hubal, okay? The presiding deity was Hubal. Now, page 17. Although originally under the aegis of the pagan god Hubal, the Meccan Haram, which centered around the well of Zamzam. Notice, Mecca, the city, the shrine, all swore to Hubal as the god of Mecca and the shrine. Hubal was the god of Mecca and the shrine. He was the god that was worshipped there. Now here, a leading Islamic scholar, Islamicist, he's not Muslim, but he's a leading authority on Islam, Fred McGraw-Donner, in his book, Muhammad and the Believers at the Origins of Islam. Notice what he says, okay? At the center of the town was the shrine called the Kaaba, a large cubical building with a sacred black stone affixed in one corner. That was the sanctuary to the pagan god Hubal. Now let me go back and reread or read another citation from Malis Ruthven, page 28. The god of Mecca, Hubal. The god of Mecca, Hubal, page 28 from Malis Ruthven, Islam in the World. Here's another one. A.J. Brill's First Encyclopedia of Islam, Volume 4, page 591. Encyclopedia of Islam, First Encyclopedia of Islam by E.J. Brill, Volume 4, page 591 by M.T.H. Hutzma. Okay, guys, I'm just quoting scholarly sources. Friendly sources, meaning they're not hostile to Muslims, and Muslim sources. That's all I'm doing. I'm not making it up. In the Kaaba was a statue of the god Hubal, who might be called the god of Mecca and of the Kaaba. Kaitani gives great prominence to the connection between the Kaaba and Hubal. Beside him, however, Alat, Al-Uzza, and Manat were worshipped and are mentioned in the Quran. Hubal is never mentioned there. Isn't that ironic? Hubal is never mentioned in the Quran, but Alat, Al-Uzza, Manat is mentioned. What position Allah held beside these is not exactly known. You see the confusion? We know Hubal is the chief god. He's the god of the Kaaba, the god of Mecca, the god that the pagans there swore to. And yet Hubal is not mentioned in the Quran, and we're not so certain what role Allah played there. You know why they're not certain? Can I explain to you why he's saying we're not really certain? You understand why? I'll come back and I'll explain. Hold on. I got to remember sometimes live, when we go live, sometimes things happen. Okay, watch. Good stuff, huh? This is your time. And a blessed day. Praise God, he blessed these 3 sessions, because in all 3 sessions we had over 120, 130, and that's what I want. I want to keep bringing more people. Just give me a second. YouTube always sends me a message when I play songs. Hey, you know, you have stuff that may be copyrighted. Give me a second.
All I once held dear, built my life upon all this world reveres and wars to all. All I was lucky, I have counted loss, spent and worthless now. Amen.
If I could play worship songs, I would, but I'll be flagged for it. TM, this is live. Some things happen beyond our control, brother. I'm sure you understand. Okay, let's quote some more sources. Okay? Some of them are too long for me to quote. Here, I'm going to quote something in the middle. This comes from Karen Armstrong. She's not an enemy of Islam, right? She bends over backwards to appease Muslims. Karen Armstrong, Muhammad, a biography of the Prophet, even though she doesn't believe Baal is Allah, because she's towing the Muslim party line that Allah is not Baal. Okay, Karen Armstrong, Muhammad, a biography of the Prophet, pages 61 to 62. Okay, at the time of Muhammad, the Kaaba was officially dedicated to the god Baal. And notice what she says where he came from. This is Karen Armstrong. And if you guys don't believe me that Muslims love Karen Armstrong, YouTube Karen Armstrong Islam. She was invited by Muslims to lecture on Muhammad. Okay, now watch here. This is what she says. At the time of Muhammad, the Kaaba was officially dedicated to the god Baal, a deity who had been imported into Arabia from the Nabateans in what is now Jordan. Another concession that this idol comes from Jordan and Syria, where you had the Moabites and the Ammonites. Interesting, right? And then notice what else she's going to say. She admits in another source, Islam, a Short History, pages 10 to 12, she says that the pagans before Muhammad would do the following. The pagans before Muhammad, and Muhammad adopted it. She admits these are pagan practices done before Muhammad that he adopted. What are some of the pagan practices that Muhammad adopted? This is Karen Armstrong. They would kiss the black stone embedded in the wall of the Kaaba, which was probably a meteorite that had once hurled to the ground. Oh, so wait, the pagans before Muhammad used to kiss the black stone and Muhammad adopted it? Now we know why the pagans did it. Why is Muhammad doing it? Then she says in that same source, officially, the shrine was dedicated to Baal, a Nabatean deity, and there was 360 idols arranged around the Kaaba, probably representing the days of the year. Okay, Karen Armstrong, you are not hostile to Islam. You're very friendly to Islam and you bend over backwards to appease Muslims. And Muslims even invite you to lecture in their meetings. And they praise your books, your biography on Muhammad and your introduction to Islam. And you admit that the shrine was officially dedicated to Baal? Okay, now let me tell you the problem with this. This is not my opinion. Read any book on paganism in the ancient world. Guys, this is where I need you to listen. Read any book that outlines pagan beliefs and practices in the ancient world. This is a fact. Among the pagans, a shrine would be erected for one particular deity, not two. That doesn't mean they didn't acknowledge the existence of other gods and goddesses. It simply means that they would erect a shrine for one particular deity, and that shrine belonged to him and not to someone else. Okay? Now, again, I feel bad giving this example because it may give you the impression that I'm likening this to paganism. No, I'm not saying this is paganism. But I want you to see the concept. If you guys come from an Orthodox background, if you're Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox or Catholic, you guys are in the practice of erecting a church in honor of a saint, some great saint used by the triune God who's now glorified in the presence of God, right? You with me there, right, you guys? Okay. Once that church is erected in honor of a saint, that church will be given the name of that saint, but you don't give it the name of two saints, right? You don't say, this is a church of, let's say, Peter and Mary. Typically, a church, when it's erected in honor of the saint, it's named after that saint alone, and he's the patron saint of the church. Doesn't mean you don't recognize other saints. It means this is the church, in his honor, he's the patron saint of the church, correct? You don't erect a church for two saints. That's what pagans did for their gods and goddesses. When they erected a shrine for a god, that was the patron god of that shrine. It belonged to him, not to another. Now, you could honor other gods and goddesses in that shrine, but you couldn't say the shrine belonged to them because it belonged to this one, right? With me there? Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Remember, just correct me if I'm wrong. I can be corrected because, again, I don't know everything. Thank you, Dominus Telcum, St. Peter Basilica. Okay. Folks, did you hear all these sources? Muslims and non-Muslims. Non-Muslims friendly to Islam. Did you hear when I read, they all admit the shrine, the Kaaba, was built for Baal. Since pagans did not erect a shrine for more than one god, if they're admitting that Baal is the god of the Kaaba, where does Allah fit in? Because Muslims are telling us the Kaaba was built for Allah. How does Allah fit in this scheme? If Baal was the god of the Kaaba was built for him. Can you help me understand that? Then who is Allah? If the Kaaba is the shrine of Allah, but it's the shrine of Baal, and you can't have a shrine for more than one god. Here, connect the dots, the necessary logical inference and conclusion, Allah was the name of Baal was the name of Allah. How do you get around it? No, it wasn't that he's renamed Tippy Bear. He's not. Do you remember earlier, Tippy Bear, when I said, I don't know if you're getting this, sister. Follow with me, please. Did the Jews rename Elohim Yahweh, Jehovah? Did they rename him Jehovah and stop calling him Elohim? Okay, so why would you say Hubal was renamed? No, the pagans would have called Hubal Allah because Allah would have been used by them to refer to the chief God. If you're the chief God, you're Allah. Now, if you mean that in Islam, the name Hubal was dropped and they focused just on Allah, and then they disconnected Allah from Hubal, that's exactly what Satan did through Muhammad. Let me repeat that again. Here is Satan's mastermind. He disassociated Allah from Hubal through Muhammad, and the connection with Hubal was lost in order to deceive people into thinking Allah is the God of Abraham and not simply the name of Baal, because Satan worked through Muhammad as his prophet to dissociate Hubal from Allah, making it seem they're not the same in order to deceive 1.7 billion people from not realizing they're worshiping Baal under the guise of Islam. That's the satanic mastermind. That's why I said Islam is the religion of Baal. You get it now? If that's what you meant to be, this. That's the mastermind of Satan. That's the mastermind of Satan. Allah was the name for Hubal. Hubal is Baal. But in order to mislead and deceive people from realizing that they're worshiping the god Baal, he raised up Muhammad, the son of Satan, this antichrist, and got Muhammad to disassociate Allah from Hubal, so that the connection between Hubal and Allah was lost, so that you wouldn't see that Allah was simply Baal, in order to then deceive people into Baal worship, but disguising it as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Exactly, Alex Gaskin. His last straw. So Islam is nothing more than revamped Baal worship, and Baal was the chief competitor to Jehovah, and he's still the chief competitor to Jehovah under the guise of Islam.